Here at the Seizing an Alternative Conference at Pomona College, Claremont, California, I'm talking to Larry Rasmussen, author of Earth Honoring Faith, Religious Ethics in a New Key. In a couple of tracks I attended on ecological economics and ecological concerns were moving freely between the two disciplines. But in the church's theology, we usually end up separating the two.
I was just going to say the parallels are also present in the way in which economics is still done. I mean, what Herman Daly described as economics 101, in most schools, a circle that is self-contained but doesn't include in the environment is still the case.
Yes.
So it's you have to get into environmental economics or ecological economics and so on in order to break out of what is the orthodoxy. The orthodoxy is still pretty much in place, and certainly economic growth is still the orthodoxy. In fact, it's kind of a fundamentalism by this point.
In the plenary this morning, in the Daly and Cobb interview, Cobb says it's easier for theologians to do without God than it is for economists to do without growth.
And that, a lot of that has been imported into, Christian theology.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think the parallels that you're drawing between economics and in the church, both are grounded in the same place, and that is the economic establishment since the Industrial Revolution is one where it made it possible to bypass seasons and cycles in nature, and on the basis of compact stored energy in the form of fossil fuels, you had a built environment that became the preferred human habitat. And you could just keep adding to that so long as there were resources, and then they were hugely abundant, by coal, and oil and gas and so on. So that made possible economic growth, which then became institutionalized and served a great purpose. I mean, when World War II ended and Roosevelt administration and then the Truman administration, they self-consciously pursued an economy of consumerism because you had tens of thousands of people coming back from the war that needed jobs. You had Europe and East Asia destroyed and needed to be rebuilding. You had this shift that you needed to make from a military-based economy to consumer economy. So all of that made good sense at the time and was possible because of the Industrial Revolution and fossil fuels. At the same time, what happened in the circles of the church and in religious communities, most certainly in the West, is that you could accept that picture of the human separate from the rest of creation, and exercising dominion, So I think both are rooted in the same phenomenon of a post-industrial revolution reality based in fossil fuels, and now we can't go that way anymore for the reason that Daly gave, that the economic growth is now progress is kind of eating itself alive.
I came across in your book, and in a book I read later on about William Catton called Overshoot, the idea that technological humanity has quickly outstripped what he calls the carrying capacity of the Earth's resources in a way that's already unsustainable.
But the Canadians, I'm trying to think of the one that Canadians that learn to measure the human footprint vis-a-vis the resources. also people who on scientific grounds can show you what overshoot
Yeah.
is, what the footprint actually is, and how many Earths it takes if
Yeah.
you're going to kind of maintain
Yeah.
that.
I think your book probably helped me understand William Catton's book, because
Oh.
we're right there and how the fossil fuels got there, and
Yeah.
you know, your first couple of chapters about beginnings,
Yeah.
something that we don't really think about in terms of theology at all.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
It certainly hasn't been the standard line.
Right.
No, that's certainly true. But people in theological disciplines
Yes.
have been attending to these issues.
Yeah.
It was the World Council of Churches and the Justice, Peace, Creation, Integrity of Creation program, and before that, already when in the 80s, had a program on toward a just, participatory, and sustainable society. Now that's a long time ago
Yeah.
on these matters, and I think it's correct that the World Council of Churches gave the world the notion of sustainability as pertaining to society. It had been used for such things as fish catches or timbering. How much timbering could you do, and the forest would yet be sustainable, would replenishing itself, or what could your fish catch be, and the fish stock would continue at that level or better. But as a norm for society, I think it's the World Council of Churches quite a long time ago. So it isn't that there hasn't been any attention. In my own
I was speaking of, you know, in general
no,
layman's terms.
You're right. I mean, I'm in conversations here where one of the participants is the spouse of a local Lutheran pastor, and they've got all kinds of things going in the Hudson Valley. Community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, et cetera, ecologically very conscious about the cleanup of the Hudson River. Pete Seeger and the PCBs and the Hudson and GE has to clean up and so on. But she said in the congregation there, and a lot of the congregational members are involved in one or these other of these projects, none of them make a connection between that kind of involvement and commitment and their faith. I mean, you're right as a general description.
Yeah. Is there a need or a place for some new eschatology, you know, for the Anthropocene age?
Yes. I mean, my quick reply is yes. We must attend to that. Because the subject of eschatology is, of course, the future, and the Anthropocene ratchets up human responsibility to levels we haven't broached before, because now our collective human impact goes through ecological systems, and it affects future generations. It's probably shutting down some possible evolutionary paths. I mean, we're talking about dimensions of time in the Anthropocene under the impact of human beings that did not exist before. You could have said before, like the Bible, that there are consequences under the third and fourth generation, you know, but now it's probably deep time, at least on the planet, that is affected by human action. So eschatology in that sense, what kind of future is it that we're talking about? So that's one dimension of it, and the other dimension of it is that you need to ask the question then about traditional eschatologies, which did have some kind of picture of a new heaven and a new earth.
Right.
And if our actions are so all pervasive, then that is creative of the new heaven and the new earth. And in the picture, even in the New Testament, it's heaven that descends. It's heaven that's raptured to earth. It's not the other way around.
Right.
I mean, the throne of God exists in the middle of the city, and the rivers of the waters of life flow from the throne of God through the city, and the banks are the trees of life with their fruit in every season. So there's a picture of a new earth. Now, what kind of sense does that make now, at a time when we're really actually probably moving into a different geological epoch where human civilization has never been before? We've all been in the Holocene. We've never been. And we've never merged human time and geological time before. So eschatology becomes then a critical theological base point to be considered. But we're going to have to do it in ways that are also theologically creative and not the kind of eschatology that's standard. With earth denying and earth escaping.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, how confident are you specifically about the church in this situation?
I think that what we see already, and where I locate myself, what we see already is the same kind of parting of the ways that we see in society at large. Mm-hmm. There are places of tremendous kind of creativity and appropriation of deep traditions and resources that have been overlooked, neglected, regarded as irrelevant.
Yep.
That kind of creativity institutionally, in terms of consciousness, in terms of ideas, is happening. And it's happening in religious communities and other than religious communities. So some of the church is going there. I was recently at a liturgics conference in Indiana, where the theme, it's an annual thing, they've been doing it for, I think, 47 years, where this year the theme was the environment, liturgy. Some of the new hymnody knocked me over, you know, and some of the new liturgical forms that felt very comfortable because they were coming from a place with which we were all familiar. So it wasn't, you know, off the edge. That kind of creativity is happening. At the same time, you're getting an entrenchment or a re-entrenchment in what has been really the industrial paradigm, the theology that has been assumed in our kind of economy. You know, Frederick Jameson says it's easier to convince Americans of the end of the world than to convince them of the end of capitalism. and so the kind of economic forms which don't think about capitalism, but which are grounded in that kind of political economy, that's going to be fought tooth and nail. You know, so that's what I mean by parting of the ways. And I don't see the churches in only one or the other of those camps. So you will get alliances of church folk with so-called secular folk working on these issues, who will have much more in common with one another than with other church folk, off in a different direction. That's the reality of change. I mean, that's what happens when paradigms shift.
Well, Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.